listening to the Savvy Musician Show with Leah McHenry, and this is your secret weapon for success in the new music industry. All right, guys, welcome to today's show. I am so excited. I have a really cool guest in the house. His name is Sebastian Wolf. That is one badass name, if you ask me. Sebastian, he's been involved in the video game music industry for over a decade. He's been modernizing practices of rights management, royalty collection, and assessing music publishing opportunities for game developers, publishers, and composers. And Sebastian co-founded the U.S. mechanical rights company called Loudr, which was acquired by Spotify in 2018. And then after leaving in 2016, he founded Materia Collective, which is a leading video game music group that manages soundtrack distribution and publishing and produces CDs, vinyl, and sheet music. So you've only accomplished a few things. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, Leah, it's a pleasure to be part of the Savvy Musician Academy and join for the podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because we've been connected for a little while and we've been Facebook friends and kind of emailing back and forth and little pen pals. And so I'm just excited to really finally connect on here. And I just think that you've got so much knowledge in areas where I feel like as myself as a musician and so many others, we just have no idea like some of these technical things going on in the background that are so important and so pivotal, especially when it comes to like the revenue aspect. And I'm just really excited to talk to you because you really know the ins and outs of these things. How did you get started in this whole world of video game music?
Yeah, thank you. It's a complex world out there, and I'm still sort of scraping at the surface a little bit. So it's always nice to connect with like-minded experts and sort of share news and information and new discoveries about the industry that we all live and work in. What a great question to start out with. It's always nice to ask working musicians and, especially music tech folk who sort of found their way through these like circuitous paths into the industry that they now work in. I grew up playing piano. I guess that was my start. And I decided to enrich my performance repertoire with Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy music once I hit high school and sort of tried figuring out a bunch of arrangements myself. And that sort of led me on a path down the road to, well, how can we monetize cover songs? What are the hurdles that other working musicians encounter when trying to deal with rights and licensing and negotiations? And then, over the past decade, I had the pleasure of being a co-founder of Loudr and helping tens of thousands of musicians find ways to legally distribute cover songs and make sure that more composers and rights holders ultimately get paid.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I definitely want to dip our toes in those waters a little bit, if that's possible during this episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so once you got into the gaming world of music, what happened after that? And then how did you end up starting Loudr?
The Loudr story is interesting. It originally started out as sort of a spin-off for a collegiate a cappella group. One of the leaders for the group at UC Santa Cruz approached me one day and said, "Hey, Sebas, I'm thinking about starting this record label, and we want to help cover songs get on iTunes." And that was the entire pitch. Help collegiate a cappella groups get on iTunes and help them with licensing and negotiations. And I said, yeah, that sounds fun. Let's do it. And 9 years later, Spotify buys the company. But the path into it was really, what's sort of missing from the marketplace, and how can we empower other creators to do more cool things, not only legally but also sort of empower others with knowledge about sort of what does the marketplace look like? What does the entire music ecosystem look like? And I know we can talk about this a little bit later as well, but I think it's so vital and important for anyone working in the industry to just absorb as much knowledge as possible, not only about the creative parts of it, but also the business, the legal, licensing, accounting, all the dry stuff that no one really wants to dip their toes into, but I think are just so fun and, well, also rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. So, Spotify acquired Loudr, and what are they doing with that? Do you mind if I ask? Like, how does that coincide with a company like Spotify?
After I left the company, I haven't had too much insight into it, but Spotify is one of the largest music companies right now, and I think what they're doing is tremendously cool. Um, and of course, having had all of the experience at Loudr, knowing what they do in terms of matching sound recordings with musical compositions and working on this vast, complex network of music rights and making sure that composers and songwriters get paid appropriate and accurate amounts. It seemed like a natural fit. Spotify has, I don't know how many millions of songs in their catalog. And when you think about it, there's so much information there that, many rights holders and publishers, have to keep track of and provide. So I think Loudr, is doing the entire music community a fantastic service in terms of, the tasks that they do on very, very large data sets of making sure that, even composers that are just owed a couple of dollars, that they do get paid those amounts.
Yeah, that's very good. What's your view of streaming in the new music industry? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? In your opinion, how should musicians look at this?
The big question.
Yeah, I know. No pressure.
I'm not on the spot at all. That's okay. I mean, of course, I have a vested interest. I'm very much pro streaming, but I think there's always a caveat, right? I mean, on one side, it's in a certain way, streaming has distilled audience tastes because you can no longer release, an entire album and you have two hits on there that people will want to listen to. Now the entire album has to be hits, otherwise people will simply, press skip. And I think that is forcing a lot of creators to focus more on it, sort of like individual quality for everything that they do put out has more of a quality gloss. Because
That's a
now,
really good point.
maybe, and this is just me sort of spitballing here a little bit, but I truly believe, especially as the barrier of entry to creating and publishing and distributing music has gotten so accessible, which is fantastic. Now I wouldn't describe it as competing, but so many musicians now are, confronted with, well, what do I make that is special that my fan base will want to listen to, connect with, and spend a couple of minutes, of their precious day listening to? I think I don't know the exact numbers, but Spotify must be getting hundreds of thousands of new songs that are submitted every day, every week. I can try to find the article. There was a specific number, but with that much of a waterfall of music, how do we as individual creators stand out against that? And it sort of pinpointed the issue about what do we offer as musicians, as creators, that is inspiring enough for people to go out of their way to listen to it on an individual song basis rather than like an album release or an album basis at all.
So it's almost like I see where you're going with this from almost like a free market perspective. It's like every song needs to be good, as opposed to in the old music industry, it was like you could have an album with just a couple of hits and, the rest would be fillers. And it's like you can't really get away with that now if you really want to succeed. It's like every song has to be good in order to really maximize the exposure and the potential. Do you agree?
To a certain degree, yes. We definitely are all competing for people's, on the web space, it's, we're competing for people's attention and eyeballs. In music space, we're competing for people's, well, ears, I suppose, but also their attention, right? Even if music is passively consumed, listeners still make an active choice about, hey, this is the genre, this is the music, this is the style that I want to listen to. And, especially as music algorithms and AI is getting smarter about matching listeners with their habits, with their potential styles and influences. I think the automated like start a radio playlist on Spotify, that tool from any kind of track, I think it's marvelous, and I can't even fathom how much technology sort of is behind that. But if we're thinking about that, we now have machines that are curating playlists based on tastes, which means that in order to show up in those playlists or even the manually curated playlists, we need to consider the quality that is required to compete with the ever-rising baseline of quality that everyone else is producing.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Can you talk to us for a second about the legal end of cover songs? We have so many people that ask us all the time, and I'm like, I'm not a lawyer, but I know that there's a lot to this, and you've dealt with it. So give us a little, I know you can't share everything in this episode, but give us a little taste of, what are the main things involved when you're doing cover songs?
Of course, I'll add my standard disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. None of this is legal advice.
Right.
I think cover songs are just one of the coolest things in general. Just because it's sort of in that middle ground between someone else's original idea and then sort of painting that original idea with a new color or in a different style. And sort of that amount of like reinterpretive aspect that gives fans who might already be fans of the original song a completely new contextualization of what they already know and appreciate, I think is one of the coolest things. And we can talk about sort of the soundtrack elements of that, where the context is not the music but rather the game or the TV show or the movie itself. But it's one of those cool things that really facilitates and empowers a fan base to celebrate those things. And given to what extent cover songs have popularized, bands that have then exploded and become big. We talk about Justin Bieber, who uploaded cover songs in the early days, and then was discovered on YouTube and went on to lead a career of sorts. Some people have heard of him, and given how sort of prevalent cover songs are in our entire culture, it's still fascinating to me how many hurdles there are to jump through. I've definitely dealt with music publishers on a personal level, when trying to negotiate a mechanical right, and there's a back and forth over the phone call, of course, because some of these publishers don't have email, and we're trying to negotiate rights, and it's like, well, you're welcome to fax to us a license request, and we will consider it, and then we will respond with a fee that we charge.
What's a fax machine?
A facsimile.
Oh, like what? Are we faxing them information?
I have faxed far more legal agreements than I care to admit. And of course, it's not truly representative of the music publishing world, but there is a lot of technophobia that is still very much instilled within the rights world, especially on music and intellectual property.
Yeah.
Where there's almost a fear of the internet, email in general, and so it's as we're looking towards like, okay, we have 40, 50, 60 million musical works that exist that all need to be managed, ideally in a sort of a centralized and very accessible manner and database where rights holders and rights users all get to access it. We're very far away off from that as a reality, and to a certain extent, things like the Music Modernization Act do facilitate it and are a stepping stone in the right direction. But ultimately, what we have is a lot of publishers who are not interested in or have not necessarily prioritized technological advancement or invested into a future of data accessibility and metadata proliferation. And that ultimately becomes sort of the thing that is holding back a more even and accessible licensing platform that enables more cover song artists to do what they really want to do, which is, make sure original creators get paid, but also have the freedom to put out the content that they want. I suppose this was a prelude to the actual answer. Um, in the US, to a large degree, one needs a mechanical license from each and every single one of the rights holders, or in certain cases, just one, to be able to sell a cover song and then remit the royalties that fall off either on a statutory basis, something like 9.1 cents, or 1.75 cents per minute or fraction thereof, if we want to dive deep into Title 17 of the copyright law.
Mm.
And those royalties have to be remitted back on a monthly or quarterly basis, sort of whatever is decided. And all of that is, changing come 2021 with the full implementation of the Music Modernization Act. So,
Okay.
some interesting times ahead.
Yeah. So a quick question, because I know a lot of our listeners are going to wonder, what if you're not planning to sell the song? And let's say you want to just like do the cover song and upload it to YouTube. What's involved with that? Do you need a license for that?
The answer is likely yes. Anytime you're making use of something that you don't fully own, you need a license or a permission of some degree. And even if it is an email from someone who has the ability to grant those rights, that can substitute as a license on a more formal level. But again, I always recommend checking with an attorney about specifics, because music rights are a vast and complex beast, and even on an artist level, some may not always know what rights they have that they can grant, because 20-page agreements are often skimmed. 60-page agreements are often, not read and blindly signed. And that's a separate thing we can talk about.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot of us who are, a lot of artists that I work with that are a little bit afraid of like uploading cover songs anywhere, just because things have gotten so tight and strict, especially on Facebook. The AI is getting so smart, and just all this, like, even if you were to upload a video, even if you were to upload a video and there was a song playing in the background and it wasn't even your song, the AI can now detect and tell you, you don't have permission to use this song, or it's going to ask you, is this your song? Do you have permission to use it? It's crazy how smart the systems have gotten. And, it just makes us all, we're all afraid that our accounts will get shut down, or those of us who are running Facebook ads. I mean, that can be very serious, especially if they shut us down. So it's just getting so tricky, it seems like. And, like we're having to walk on eggshells a little bit. So it's just a really interesting world that we live in right now. And I see things improving for the artist. And like you said, like accessibility has never been this available to the average musician. So it's incredible. And on the other hand, it's a little bit scary. There's just so much to contend with. So very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and in regards to YouTube and Facebook especially, as more and more content sort of gets accepted into Content ID, sort of empowering the platform to make sure that royalties and licenses are remitted. At the end of the day, all of us are musicians, and we sort of want, we want compensation, or we want attribution, and we want to make sure that the music that we create, reaches new listeners. And I think what one of the biggest hurdles is, I think Universal Music Publishing Group sort of led the charge in helping Facebook become compliant about user-generated content, and making sure that things that Universal Music Publishing represents are not necessarily claimed, but at least attributed, and made sure that those are tracked, and that they know what how their artists and their music is doing on these platforms. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will see more of a focus on user-generated content in more of a open licensing marketplace, where instead of when you upload a cover to Facebook, much like in certain cases what YouTube helps facilitate, there's a little checkbox that, that is, this is a cover song, and which, may grant the permission to have the video up, and the ads that support the video go back to Universal Music Publishing or whoever asserts rights on those. Or maybe there's even a revenue share option, which does exist in some cases on YouTube. And of course, YouTube has had a few more years of runway to implement and make sure that those are options that are feasible and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
But I I would definitely embrace those attributes and those sort of accessibility options, because as cover song artists, I'm a cover song artist. I would love to just upload my content wherever, knowing that the platform has taken care of the necessary rights. But in the current music world, with 220 PROs and music publishers all being still a bit intimidated by the internet, I think it will take a few years.
Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts. One is, there are some artists out there that are purely cover song artists. There's some really well-known ones. There's a vocal band. Oh, what are they called? Pentatonics. And they're just
Pentatonics.
Yes. Yeah, and they just do cover songs, and they're fantastic. I think they have some original stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
I do think they have some original stuff, but fantastic. And I'm just wondering, is it very costly and expensive to acquire some of these licenses? Do you know?
It depends. Loudr used to have sort of a consumer licensing platform, which was recently sunset. Other companies like Easy Song Licensing or even Harry Fox's Songfile, they allow you to get licenses. In many cases, you pay up front, even for digital, which is a little bit weird. But say you're pressing 500 CDs of a cover album, you can go to a website, you pay for your the service fee, and you pay up front for those mechanical royalties. And platforms like Easy Song Licensing really help that and facilitate that and make sure that you're legal and compliant. On the digital side, it's a little bit more complicated, but there's also a growing trend of digital distributors like like DistroKid, like SoundDrop, and there's a couple of other ones as well, who take care of the mechanical licensing for any potential cover songs as part of the distribution process. And I think that's really empowering for artists, because no one really wants to sort of think about the nuances of how many royalties do I have to pay on what cycles. Us as creators, we want to focus on creation for a large part, right?
Definitely. Yeah, there's certain parts of the music business I think, we definitely need to take some ownership of, but the mechanical license side of things, those technical details are definitely, take us out of the creation mode for sure. And and this is why you've kind of fascinate me, because you are a composer, you are a musician, and yet you're also a total I want to call you like a tech nerd as a compliment. As a compliment.
Of course.
Yeah. And you just know so much about all this stuff. And speaking of YouTube, I actually got an email from them the other day saying, hey, are you frustrated with other people uploading your content? Well, you can now ask them to take it down, or you can take these different actions. I was like, wow. So you can, I don't know, maybe other people have gotten these emails before me, but this is the first time I saw it. So I went on there, I just clicked the button, and they'll actually show you the other YouTube users out there, the profiles who have uploaded copies of your music. And you can see the view count. Yeah, you can see the view count. You can see how many subscribers they have. And then you can choose to take an action or not take an action. In this case, I didn't take any actions. There's only like 2 or 3 people. Now, actually, I think there's more than that out there who have uploaded my music. But at this point, I'm still technically an underground artist. I'm actually fine with people spreading my music out there. I'd rather gain new fans. That's the way I see it right now. If they had millions and millions of views, maybe that would be a different story, So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's and what you said, I think, is really powerful, because I think that's a really healthy mindset to approach user-generated content. Because at the end of the day, an average fan isn't necessarily going to know or appreciate that, if by them re-uploading content blindly and not really giving attribution, it has the potential to hurt you. Your growth, your success, it might, if they're the first to upload it, your own videos on your YouTube will show up a little bit later and a little bit further down in the search results. And those are just, things and nuances that most fans don't think about. And honestly, they shouldn't. So I think YouTube sort of providing a tool set like that empowers, not only the big publishers or the big labels, but also the indie artists who, very much do own rights, have more accessible options of managing those rights. I think that's really powerful. And my hope is, of course, that through the efforts that you're doing, through podcasts and other educational efforts, that that artists have not only the tools but also the wisdom to use those tools correctly in line with sort of what their strategy is.
Yeah, that's so important. Yes, very much. Talk to me a little bit about metadata. What is it?
I love metadata.
Yeah. That's like talking dirty to you or something, right? Metadata.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's one of my favorite things, and a friend of mine recently described it. Metadata is your legacy, and to a certain degree, I very much agree with it. In looking at sort of the metadata that most music publishers have and most record labels have, it's like, well, the album has a title and it has a subtitle and it has an artist on it, and that's sort of where the metadata ends. And the scope of metadata is honestly for me, it's a gigantic and vast network that sort of encompasses anyone who is tangentially related to an album release, to a song, to a musician. And in many ways, the popularization of sort of the blockchain and all of those efforts encompass a lot of those qualities. So metadata is more than an album title. It is, ISO identifiers, it is subtitles, it is translations, it is IPMs, it is ISNI numbers for artists, it is ISWCs for compositions, it is ISRCs for tracks, sort of all of these standards that are part of this music ecosystem, which in some cases result in royalties being attributed correctly or incorrectly, and in other cases help licensing platforms like Loudr, like Easy Song Licensing, like Harry Fox and Music Reports, and even all the PROs. Metadata helps these companies make sure that the right people get paid. I don't know how many times you've listened to this very popular track called Track 01 from Unknown Artist on Unknown Album.
Right, yes.
And that is sort of the death of metadata. You have an audio file and you don't know who it's by, who composed it, who worked on it, who the mixing engineer is, who the producer is, where it was recorded, where it was produced. Sort of all of these data points are so important. And what I've started telling all of my clients and my artists, keep track of absolutely everything that you can, even if it's not being used in the marketplace or in licensing platforms right now. It might in the future. It might be relevant. And 10 years down the road, you won't remember where exactly you recorded it, or who your cinematographer was for the music video that you shot. Keep track of it now, so that you always have an archive. And there's a couple of companies, most poignantly Tune Registry, which helps music publishers and artists and even small labels sort of keep track of all of that metadata and then help distribute it.
That's great.
Run by my friend Dave Bogan down in Los Angeles, and they're doing such great work. They work with Sound Exchange and GraceNote and MediaNet and Quantone and AcoustID and sort of all of these companies that sound like word salad to someone who isn't part of the music tech space, but all of them are responsible for helping catalog and identify all of that metadata. So I love metadata. You got me on a path, and I'll just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, here's a question for you, for the musicians out there. Just tell musicians why do they need to care about this, and what will happen if they don't care about this?
If they don't care about it, they won't be attributed correctly. In some cases, they won't get paid. In other cases, their royalties will simply go to a black box. So I think accurate metadata is one piece of the puzzle, and then the other piece of the puzzle is, of course, knowing all the rights organizations and royalty companies and types of royalties that do fall off, where it is the onus on the artist as a performer or a songwriter to go forth and claim those.
Okay. So tell us, what's the proper way, for those who don't know, to embed metadata into your music?
Embedding, I don't know how much of a thing the actual embedding is now, because a lot of distributors take care of that metadata now. Even with Bandcamp or with DistroKid or all the platforms like iTunes and Spotify, they have all the metadata there. I think it's mostly important to proliferate that metadata. First step, of course, is have it all at least in a spreadsheet somewhere, or ideally to in registry, but then also proliferate it to all the other platforms. I wouldn't say it's as important as embedding it into files, and I could be wrong about that. I'd love to do more research about that, but for me, metadata is more of a network with different partners in different places who extract the important parts for their needs.
Okay, well, that's really good to know, because I was thinking that the one way I've learned to embed metadata is, at the mastering level, like actually whoever's mixing or mastering, input some of the metadata into the files themselves. And then also a guy named Michael Elsner, who was on this podcast, he's in the licensing world.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he was telling me about how you can put your songs in iTunes, and if you're on a Mac, Command I will pull up the info, and you can actually input a whole bunch of metadata right in there, which is nice, even keywords or anything you want. So that's that part of it. But to know that distributors are taking care of some of this as well, and partners and all of that, that's also another aspect that I think everybody needs to be aware of. And like you said, having a spreadsheet somewhere and keeping track of absolutely everything, that's really fantastic. So my next question is, can you do anything about songs that were already released or albums that were released 10 years ago? And let's say you didn't release any metadata with it. What should you do?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a right answer for that. I mean, definitely make sure that the ISRCs are registered in places. That matching companies, that PROs have all of that information, so that at least they can go forth and match it with musical compositions and make sure that the songwriters do get paid. Places like Sound Exchange, who are responsible for collecting master royalties. As far as I know, they do a lot of matching primarily by ISRC, which means that you want to make sure that your catalog has been delivered to places like Sound Exchange, so that they can actually match it to the correct usages and make sure you get paid.
Yeah. And I'm sure almost everybody listening to this podcast knows what an ISRC is. It's that barcode, essentially, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it's assigned to that specific song, and it's universally recognized no matter where it is, correct?
Exactly. So the biggest thing is that it's permanent. So the International Standard Recording Code is permanent for that specific song. So even if you pull it from a label and you self-release it and self-distributed it, it will still have that same ISRC code or ISRC code. So I've talked to many artists who have worked with a label who's released their soundtrack or their album, and they have no idea what the UPC is, what the ISRCs are. It's like, no, you have to know this, because if ever you want to go down the path of maybe reclaiming your master copyrights or something like that, you know exactly what the metadata is. So it's important, for artists to empower themselves with that knowledge. First, why it's important, and then 2, how to obtain it, and 3, how to use it.
Yes, very good. In your opinion, is it still very necessary that every musician goes and copyrights all their music? Is that still a very valid, important thing to do? Or is it just good enough to upload it to a distributor, like a digital distribution platform? And does that count as copywriting these days?
No, it absolutely does not count as copywriting. And of course, the knowledge I have is specific to US law, but there are many statutory protections and other benefits in place for making sure that you have your either your sound recording, SR, or a performance copyright in place for any kind of music that you write, that you perform. For example, if someone infringes on your copyright, there are certain there are certain necessities that are required to be able to litigate against someone. So, for example, if someone on Facebook or SoundCloud or wherever really takes your piece of music and puts it in a video, and they get 50 million views, if you don't have your copyright registered for that sound recording or even a musical composition, your choices are going to be rather limited. And despite the slowness of the US Copyright Office, there are ways to express it, of course. But I highly recommend registering copyrights prior to releasing the music. The whole myth of the poor man's copyright, just don't do it. Just pay the $75 or $85 or $95, whatever it is right now. Make sure that you register the copyright, and in 14 months you'll get a receipt of the copyright, and you'll be able to really use that to empower yourself with future options, just in case something does happen.
Yeah, that's really good. And are there services out there that do this for you, or do you recommend not using services and go directly to the specific Copyright Office?
The Electronic Copyright Office, or the Copyright Office, has an electronic registration option, which makes both the metadata delivery, hey, here it is again, and the proof of any kind of digital good, the delivery of that, so much easier. If you're unfamiliar with that, I would recommend working again with a legal counsel who will walk you through it, because there are certain nuances that are important to recognize. Does a group registration make sense? If you're the composer and the performer, are there benefits to registering it a certain way as opposed to another way? And those are things that I think are really important to at least have 1 hour with an attorney and pay your $300, $400, $500 just to have that knowledge and insight that will be specific to your individual needs. And then the next time, maybe you will be confident and empowered enough with that information to know how to register your copyrights.
Yeah, that's so good, and really good wisdom shared there for sure. Is there anything else you want to share with us that you think is really important for musicians to know about the metadata and copyrights, anything to do with that?
Other than being extremely vigilant and aggressive about capturing as much information they can, down to something like, okay, you're recording a cover song, what is the legal name of all the songwriters? Can you get access to the CAE or IPI numbers of those songwriters? These are all things that will be easier for matching companies and PROs down the road as their technology improves. But having a primary source of information rather than a secondary or a third-party source of information that you have to rely on is always the best. So make sure that you have as much information on hand always about all of your music, so that you can empower yourself if there's ever a question, and you don't have to look through old receipts and do research, because 10 years from now, the data will have aged and you will not want to be able to do, or you will not want to do that research. So do it now.
That's such good advice. I hope everybody's listening to that. Take the advice, start some spreadsheets, get vigilant, get aggressive about documenting everything, because you never know when you could be missing out on a significant amount of revenue because of that. So you've definitely motivated me to do more of that. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
I know it's not the fun part of the business, but I think it's just vitally important.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it comes down to potential revenue, I think, because for musicians, the revenue is what keeps the music alive, right? We all need to pay the bills. We all need to have fuel in the fire to keep us going. So I think anything that can contribute to that bottom line is really important. So sometimes the not so sexy stuff becomes a lot more sexy when you make money from it. So
spreadsheets, but with money attached.
Yeah. Exactly. Can you tell us what you're learning right now? What are you up to these days?
I'm learning about tax law and accounting
So fun, more sexy stuff.
Absolutely. I won't bore anyone with like US tax code and all the fun revelations I'm having. The best resource I've read in the last year or two is a book by an author called Ramit Sethi. The book is called, and ignore the clickbait title, I promise it delivers on everything it promises. The book is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And if you're an artist or a musician or literally any kind of creator who, like me, isn't the best at money, or are just like, you don't like balancing the checkbook or taking care of all of that stuff, this book is my Bible. And I bought a couple of dozen copies and I just started sending them out to friends like, hey, read this. This is so important. And I have another small library of just finance books and accounting books and law books, but we don't have to get into those.
Yeah, that's a fantastic resource. Thank you for sharing that. We will put that book in the show notes so people can go and get it, because I also believe that, I think, it's just because we're musicians and we're artists and we're not necessarily wired in a certain way. Most of us didn't fall out of bed being good at money, maybe the odd person. Some of these things they're just learned skills, and they're life skills, and we need to learn them. If we want to be better, if we want to be more profitable, if we want to be more satisfied in life, we just have to start learning some of these things, even if they're not always as fun. But the title of that book sounds kind of fun. So I think that, I Will Teach You to Be Rich sounds like a fun title. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to definitely go read that for sure. And just before we close, what would you say to musicians today who want to make a living with their music? What's your best advice for them? I know you shared so much already about being vigilant with spreadsheets and keeping track of all your metadata, but any last piece of advice for musicians who are really wanting to increase their revenue?
Persistence. Music's kind of an unforgiving career, and I think one really has to be dedicated to it as not just a hobbyist if you're looking at commercial viability, but you have to look at it on a much longer term perspective. It's something I've heard tossed around in Los Angeles and New York as well, but hey, your music career doesn't really start until you're 30. And I laughed it off for the last decade, and then I turned 30. And well, there's something to it. And it's not necessarily about like, I'm 30, my career begins now, but it's more about, well, you spend a lot of your life sort of developing the necessary skills to be able to work in a professional capacity. You build your network, you build your creative tools, you build your collaborators, you build, even down to like the spreadsheets and the financial sides of everything. There's so much time that has to be invested up front, and it's rare, like, not to give the term any credibility, but the overnight success, no, they worked for the last 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years doing something that was maybe not specifically music related, but in their own time crafting their skill and crafting their network and crafting the connections needed to really do something special. So
yeah, the 10-year overnight success.
The 10-year overnight success, exactly. And I've definitely been in that place. When I was in college, I thought I was going to be a performance pianist, and I looked at the career options, and there were approximately 3. And it's like, okay, well, that might not be viable. And so it's so easy to lose faith in the long-term goal, but I think it's so important to keep that as a focus. Even if those goals shift, know that the perseverance and the persistence will pay off. Ultimately, the music industry of the working professionals are the ones who stuck with it. Yeah. So fight through the imposter syndrome. Fight through all the boring time that you have to spend. Doing spreadsheets and learning accounting, and all the other unsexy parts of the music industry, and just really become like a sponge for information. It doesn't have to be music. Just absorb any kind of information that you can to empower both your creative side and the business side.
Oh man, that's so good. I love that piece of advice. My dad told me when I was a kid, I said, I used to look up to my dad so much when I was young. He was a teacher and he was so knowledgeable about just the world. Like he just seems to know
Wow.
information about everything. And I said to him when I was really young, Dad, how do you know so much? And he
Mhm.
just said, I decided to be fascinated and interested in everything and
Oh,
everyone.
I love that.
Yeah. And so it's just like any person that you talk to, absorb them, like they have something, they know something you don't, and you can learn from them. And,
Mhm.
so and I just took that on and it really impacted me and my attitude towards life. And so now, I mean, I could pick up a book about building a house or something, and I will find a way to be interested and fascinated with it. Doesn't matter if it's not appealing to me initially. And so I feel like that your advice there is just so great, because if people can just learn to be sponges and absorb and be fascinated and interesting in everything and just take in that information, they will be that much more successful, because you find incredible ways of applying unrelated information to what you're doing right now. It's really weird how that works, but it's so true.
Absolutely. I mean, there comes a certain point when we become curators of information. Especially once we have sort of, well, I know these many things. Which of these are applicable? So, you know, just having a bunch of information in different areas, you know, what's the term? T-shaped people, broad understanding, deep focus in maybe one or two areas. But by sort of having that insight and almost being like an expert generalist, we can curate the information that is going to be the most useful and accessible to a specific scenario.
Yeah, definitely. Like having it's really having a certain outlook and attitude about life, but then your brain is going to assimilate the information that's really relevant to you right now. It's an amazing machine that it'll search all the databases in your brain and it'll find the information that is relevant to exactly what you need right now. And it's incredible, incredible organ. So is it an organ? What is it?
Probably. Well, it's the most important organ according to the brain, so I'm not too
Yeah.
sure.
Something else to learn. Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast. I'm so glad that we connected on here and to talk about the things that musicians, I mean, it really is kind of like a foundational piece of the music industry and for musicians making music. And it's not something that we always want to look at, but it's so important. So I thank you for being here, and I know everybody is just going to be blown away by the information you shared.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Leah. It's been a pleasure being on the Savvy Musician Academy. I hope some of the information has been useful. And thank you again. Thank you for listening in.
Absolutely. This episode was sponsored by the Superfan System Elite program here at Savvy Musician Academy. If you are looking to scale your existing music business and you're looking to get into advanced digital marketing, such as email marketing, funnels, e-commerce, Facebook ads, and more, and you're looking to build a real profitable online music business, book a call with our team at www.callsma.com. We would love to speak with you for about 30 minutes and see how we can help you. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more episodes, and we'll see you next time.